Before we get started, I want to mention the podcast Bite the Pen. It ran for 3 years, hosted by me and my co-host. We did 40 episodes regarding storytelling, history, and social commentary. If you get a chance, go check that out at bitethepen.com or on iTunes. This show, Bite the Axe, is an offshoot of that podcast. I'll be looking at stories, movies, TV, books, etc. in the context of society and culture. Tar, not the black substance that smells like crap and sticks like mud on your shoe, although the tar we'll be talking about today isn't really that far off. Tar is a 2022 drama written and directed by Todd Field and stars Cate Blanchett as Lydia Tar, a renowned conductor at the Berlin Philharmonic. The film is, whether it wants to be or not, an allegory for the scandals of sexual misconduct in the film, television, dance, and music community. But before we get into it, a brief summary of the film. If you prefer to avoid spoilers, I suggest you come back here after you've seen the movie, but I would not recommend supporting it by purchasing a ticket or spending any direct money on it, please. The summary is in part from Wikipedia. So Lydia Tar is the first female chief conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic. She relies on Francesca, her personal assistant, and Sharon, her wife and concertmaster. During an interview at the New Yorker Festival, Tar promotes her upcoming live recording of Mahler's Fifth Symphony and her book Tar on Tar. She then meets with an investment banker and amateur conductor who co-founded a foundation with Tar to support aspiring female conductors. They discuss technique, replacing Tar's assistant, and filing a vacant cello position in the Berlin Philharmonic. Tar holds a master class at Juilliard. She challenges a student repeatedly for dismissing white male composers such as Bach and encourages students to focus on the music over the musician in a painfully long and laborious scene where Tar defends old white men. Before returning to Berlin, Tar receives a first edition of a novel from Krista, a former accordion fellow. Tar tears out the title page, which Krista has embellished, and throws away the book. Before a blind audition for the cello position at the Berlin Philharmonic, Tar meets a Russian candidate, Olga Matinka, in the bathroom. She changes her scorecard to ensure Olga gets the spot in the orchestra and then grants her a soloist position in the companion piece by taking it away from the woman who actually earned the position. So as Tar prepares for the recording, her relationships with her assistant and her wife grow strained because they recognize her obvious attraction to Olga. After sending desperate emails to Francesca, Tar's assistant, Krista, the former accordion fellow, kills herself. Hello to lesbian tropes. Tar instructs her assistant to delete emails involving Krista and then retains a lawyer because Krista's parents plan to sue. Tar then informs her assistant conductor, Sebastian, of his replacement. Incensed, he indicates the orchestra is aware of her favoritism and it suggests abusive behavior. He speculates her assistant Francesca will replace him, implying an exchange of sexual favors. But Tar doesn't plan to replace him with Francesca. No. Meanwhile, Tar is being haunted by screaming women in the distance, nightmares, chronic pain, an increasing sensitivity to sound, and enigmatic scribbles resembling the ones that Krista made. While trying to complete a composition, she is disturbed by the sound of a medical device next door, where her erratic neighbor is caring for her dying mother. Then, an edited video of Lydia's Juilliard class goes viral, and an article accusing her of sexual predatory behavior appears in the New York Post. Tar, accompanied by Olga, her newest conquest, returned to New York to attend deposition for the lawsuit of Krista's parents and to promote her book, of course. When they get there, they are met by protesters. During the deposition, the plaintiffs asked Tar about incriminating emails between Francesca and Krista. In Berlin, Tar is removed as conductor due to the controversy. Furious over the allegations and her lack of communication, her wife bars Tar from seeing their daughter. Tar retreats to her old studio apartment that she's kept despite having a beautiful house with her wife and child, and grows increasingly depressed and deranged. She even sneaks into a live recording of Mahler's Fifth and tackles her replacement. It's really funny. Just seeing Cate Blanchett dive tackle somebody is so good outside of the context of this story. Advised to lie low by her management agency, she returns to her childhood home on Staten Island with her certificates of achievement around her. She then tearfully watches an old tape of young people's concerts where Leonard Bernstein discusses the meaning of music. Her brother arrives and admonishes her for forgetting her roots. Sometime later, Tar finds undemanding work conducting in the Philippines. Wanting a massage, she asks the hotel concierge for a recommendation. She is sent to a brothel where numerous young women in numbered robes are seated. After one woman looks up into Tar's eyes, she rushes outside to vomit. Finally, with her new orchestra, Tar conducts the score for the video game series Monster Hunter in front of an audience of cosplayers, banished to the Philippines to presumably never hold a respectable conducting position again. So sad. So if you couldn't tell, I have some major issues with this film. There are two things happen here that I think were worth discussing. One, the stereotypical tropes of lesbian storytelling, which is probably obvious to those who know them, and two, the allegorical, shallow, see-through sham of Todd Field's theme and message. First, I think we should get a couple things out of the way regarding the lesbian tropes in the movie. I think it's obvious to any lesbian and anyone who knows a thing or two about representation that the trope being utilized here is one of the lesbian villain. This is a long-used trope and is famously depended on in 1950s lesbian pulp fiction. Basically, it's okay to have a lesbian there. It's okay to read about having sex with another woman so long as the, quote, pursuing lesbian is made the villain. It's harmful, and it was and is a way for men to sexualize lesbians and then feel okay because, quote, the good woman in the end will return to men, as any good lesbian will do. There are, of course, exceptions to this, but far and wide, lesbian pulp fiction of the time was very centered on the evil lesbian captures the innocent young woman theme. In Tar, we return to this kind of evil lesbian character, but it doesn't quite fit the trope. The reason being that this story isn't really about a lesbian. It's definitely not about a woman, and the lesbian aspect is only used so that we as the audience can see how the women around Tar act and react to her as if she were a man. Someone ought to tell Todd Field that a man and a lesbian are two very different things. Who knew? Obviously not Todd. I think that's really all there is to say about the lesbian tropes in Tar, that it really isn't a lesbian story at all. It's an allegory for what Todd Field considers an unjust world to men, including cancel culture and the Me Too movement. I will say, and I think it deserves an episode of its own, we do see men creating lesbian films in a way that does not equate lesbians to men. Why studios continue to have men direct lesbian films, other than the obvious sexism, is beyond me, but there are cases where it works. Carol comes to mind, and even though the changes made to the film version of Tell It to the Bees were stupid and against what the author wanted, even it is considered fairly decent despite a man directing it. So Todd Field has absolutely no excuse. So let's talk about the real guts. Todd Field's allegory and the shallow see-through sham of his themes and messages in the film. First, we have to talk about the masterclass at Juilliard scene. It makes me so angry. In this scene, Tar challenges a student repeatedly for dismissing white male composers and encourages students to focus on the music over the musician in a painfully long and laborious scene where she defends old white men ad nauseum. This is one of the most uncomfortable, gross, sickening scenes I've ever seen. Todd Field goes out of his way to make this incredibly painful, and it doesn't appear to be on purpose. Rather, it seems that he genuinely wants us, the audience, to be moved by Tar's attempts at explaining why it's best to look back on the old white male composers as legends and demigods, and ignore the legitimate refusal to celebrate something that goes against one's own morals. I think it's really important here, too, to remember that while Tar is a woman in the film, she really is just a stand-in for men. The way she moves and speaks and is listened to is nice to see for a woman, but the actions and the kind of manipulation she uses is really just that of a man. So set aside the sexism for a moment and imagine Tar as a man. It's not hard. Todd made it very easy. Now, it's difficult to describe the layers of the scene if you have not seen it or didn't recognize what was happening, but I'm going to try to explain it. So in filmmaking, good filmmaking anyway, you basically want to manipulate the audience into feeling a certain way. It sounds kind of negative, but really it's just sort of part of that process. You tell a story from one specific perspective, you lean toward that way of thinking. So let's say you have a scene of a cat and a dog meeting in a backyard. Simple. If we follow this story from the cat's perspective, we may feel anxious because we're seeing the world from its view as a small animal. Maybe it's a big dog we're facing. The music of the scene would make our heart beat faster, the timing, cinematography, and editing would suggest this anxious building as the dog gets closer. The shots would be tighter and quicker until we hit that beat that we've been building to. The cat and dog beat, whatever that means. A fight, a chase, doesn't matter. On the other hand, if we're taking the perspective of the dog, this scene could be manipulated to be curious and fun. We could be happily flopping around in the backyard, smelling flowers, digging out some dirt, playing with a ball. We could see our human inside going about their business, see the warmth of the sun on our coat, listen to the cool water running from a distant sprinkler. The music could be light and carefree, and then we could see the cat in the backyard with us. We're not frightened, we're almost delighted. Look, there's something new to make friends with. So there we have the setup of the perspective. Whoever you are looking at, it is seen through the lens of that perspective. That's the basics. That's the first layer of the scene. The second layer, especially in the case with Tar, would be if everything I described was exactly the same, except instead of the dog being happily curious to meet the cat, it was actually happily curious to meet a raptor. You and I, as the audience, know that raptors are dangerous, and trying to be friends with one, as a human or a dog, is not the best idea, but everything in the scene remains the same. It's happy music, the warmth of the sun, the enjoyment of seeing our human doing their thing inside, playing with our dog toy. It creates the dissonance for the audience. We're being manipulated into this perspective as if it were harmless, while being confronted with an element that is absolutely dangerous. So that's a pretty obvious example of creating that dissonance. What we're seeing, experiencing, and feeling is in direct conflict with the reality of the situation. But when we exchange the raptor for, say, a possum, it begins to shift again. The cat went from being a cat to a raptor to a possum. So yes, the possum is cute, but it's also one of the number one causes of dog deaths. They're vicious, they tend to have diseases, they're fast. If you own a dog and live someplace where possums live, then you know it can be very dangerous. So the dissonance in the scene becomes a bit more nuanced. Now we have a possum and a dog. We, as the audience, know that this is actually not a great thing, but hey, maybe in this case, because it's a movie after all, they'll make the possum friendly. It's not totally accurate to real life, but we'll accept it. Now we add the element of gaslighting, a third layer to this scene. Despite what you know as the audience, that possums can be dangerous for dogs, we then have the possum scratch the dog. Nothing crazy, no change in the music or editing. We're still in that carefree, happy perspective with lots of warmth and joy, but something is happening on screen that is going against the grain of what we know without being obviously dangerous. If the raptor scratched the dog, we'd have to say goodbye to Lassie. But this is a possum, and we're in a movie, so maybe this is okay, especially since everything remains happy and light. The perspective we're being shown is telling us that the possum is harmless, that it's just a cute animal, and that, yeah, it may scratch you, but it's nothing. It's not bad. And in fact, you may recognize other times where you've been shown a possum being bad, but it's not really that way. No, you think it's bad, but it's not. And you know it's not because I'm telling you it's not, via the elements of film that are manipulating you. It really is a form of gaslighting in that way. What you're seeing is not what you're seeing, it's what I'm telling you are seeing. So the scene with the dog and the possum ends. Everything in the scene has shown and told you that the interaction was good and that you should be on the side of the possum because it was friendly and nice, even if it scratched you a tiny bit. Now imagine the possum is a white man, and the dog is a student of color, and the scratch is an insistence that despite the flaws of man, we should revere the geniuses that have come before, that we should ignore the fact that they have been predatory and dangerous, and that they, the possums/men, should be celebrated despite the fact that women and people of color could have been in their positions had they been given an ounce of respect that men give to one another, and that you, a student, refusing to play music by any of these old dead men shows how incredibly toxic you are, that you do not love music, that you follow woke trends because you don't know any better. This is what that scene is. This is what is infuriating. Todd Field uses a lesbian, a woman, to go into these scenes representing what white men wish to do, and actually do, on a regular basis. Field attempts to show how ridiculous it is that someone like Tar, who loves music and respects the geniuses that have come before, are persecuted because they have so much love for this music. And we truly see this when the second part of the plot takes place. The video that was taken of this epic, awful lecture Tar gives is cut and edited in a way that makes it look like she was saying awful things to the students, which she was, but it's framed as, oh no, look, Tar is being persecuted for something that she did not say. Oh my word, even though it was. How awful that this has happened to Tar. You know what, Todd? Maybe you need to go fucking listen to women, or better yet, don't write this shit. Don't make a lesbian into a representation of what you think is a persecution of innocent fucking men with privilege, wealth, and power. Fuck you. Fuck you and your fucking terrible movie. Another thing I think we should talk about is the male tropes in a woman's story. Tar, the lesbian, and woman is given so many male story beats. I know we've already established that Tar is not actually about a woman, just an allegory for men, but let's view her as a female character, and let me give you a list of things that show you why and how this story is not told from the perspective of a woman or lesbian. If Todd had taken time to consult the women or lesbians about this shitty movie, he may have avoided a lot of this bullshit. But once more, it would have been best if he had never pecked out the shitty script and final draft. Definitely would have saved me time breaking down this piece of crap. 1. Tar challenges a student repeatedly about his woke thinking, which is really the student's moral compass. I've never seen or witnessed this kind of dressing down from a woman like we see in this scene. That kind of wielding of power is exclusive to men, particularly educated white men. 2. Tar keeps her old studio apartment as her own space, a bachelor pad, and a recurring theme in many male stories, from books to television. It's been used to show how a man may not want to give up his bachelor lifestyle even after he's married. It's gross and exclusively a male thing. 3. Tar treats women as things and as roles. Her wife is a wife and only serves the wife role. Her assistant is her work wife. Olga, the new cellist, is her new student crush. If Tar were a man, this would sound very familiar to this tired and infuriating male-centered view of women. They are not people, they are things and roles, and they are there to fulfill a man's purpose, to be used and given attention like little children. 4. Tar visits her childhood home and looks at all of her past trophies, more or less. An element of male storytelling that is repeated to death. They return to their mother's house, looking fondly back at their boyhood and freedom, before things got so complicated with women and their nagging, and how manipulative women have been to make this poor man need to feel safe by returning to a childlike state. 5. Tar is respected, listened to, and awed by men purely for being a conductor and nothing else. That sounds like a good thing, but what it is entirely inaccurate and could only come from the perspective of a man who has no idea what it's like to experience being repeatedly overlooked, spoken over, disregarded, not believed, interrupted, and experiencing microaggressions, let alone outright aggression because of his gender and our society structure. As a note, this is not what Todd Field is looking to highlight. This isn't his subtle way of showing this problem. This is him channeling what happens to men and putting it into a woman so that it is, quote, acceptable and respectable, and so he can't be accused of being the asshole he is. Last but not least, 6. Tar goes to a brothel. While this isn't inaccurate for women, it is highly unlikely, especially in the Philippines, and really shows off Todd Field's lack of understanding when it comes to women. Women, if he didn't know, which he has proven completely, are quite different from men. Women tend not to go to brothels as clients because of an understanding of the sex work world, the abuse, sex trafficking, etc. It is not unheard of, it's just simply not the right beat for this story. This is 100% what a man would do, I have no doubt. But Tar is supposed to be a woman and a lesbian. I will reiterate this for Todd. Lesbians and men are not the same. Women and men are not the same. So here's the thing. I'm a big proponent of women in films being treated like men. What I mean by that is that they are not sexualized, they're not discounted, and they have all the aspects of a hero that a male character would. They're treated no differently than a man would be, especially when it comes to this outright acceptance from other men. That being said, the story of a woman is always going to have definite differences to that of a man. In other words, I think that if a woman had come up with this idea and written it without any influence from Todd Field, or any man who decides they can tell a woman's story, especially a lesbian's, the film could have worked in many ways. The problem that it has, other than all of the previous things I just mentioned, is that the message is that of a man who has witnessed the Me Too movement, felt its effects, seen how it's affected their jobs or others in the industry, and decided that it was not fair. It's not fair that all men are persecuted. That speech at Juilliard was a good thing, and then people twisted it all to make him, /Tar, sound like a bad guy. The woman that killed herself because she wanted to be with him, /Tar, and he ignored her, and that wasn't his fault. She couldn't resist his charms. He was just a little weak at that time. He didn't plan on wanting a relationship with the new person that he got hired. His decisions regarding his work being obviously for the new cellist, that wasn't really that big of a deal. Underneath it all, he really is just a good guy. And how could he lose his career, his one true love of music and conducting music, because some people mistook his actions? How unfair. Can you see how toxic our society is, persecuting men for simply being geniuses? It's a travesty. Fine, Todd. You want to make that movie? Go ahead. Go make your shitty movie. But don't drag women and lesbians into the role of this shitty argument. Women and lesbians are not dolls made of straw that you can just toss in. Not if you want to tell a good story. Todd Field, and anyone who wants to emulate this allegorical use of women and lesbians to tell the story of a male persecution. Please don't. You provide us with enough problems as it is. Thank goodness Tar didn't win any Oscars. I hope you enjoyed the tirade. It's been a pleasure.